And I'm now at a outdoor market area, which during the day is rather empty due to the intense heat. However, more people will come out in the evening as the temperatures cool off. And anyway, back to the foreign labor situation in Kuwait. Most of the labor force in Kuwait is comprised of foreign workers who make up over 78% of the country's workforce. A total of approximately 3 million foreign laborers live and work in Kuwait. And as I said before, the current minimum wage in Kuwait is 75 dinars per month, which equals approximately 250 US dollars. And I originally calculated the per hour rate based upon a 40-hour work week. However, apparently I was wrong about that. The standard work week here is 48 hours per week, and that's doing shifts of up to 12 hours each day. So that works out to approximately $1.30 per hour, which is extremely remarkably low. And however, employers are supposed to provide suitable housing and food for their employees, so this somewhat offsets the low wages, though apparently this doesn't always happen, or employees are forced to live in somewhat squalid living conditions. And most migrant workers that come here to Kuwait are from third world countries in Asia, or also poorer countries in the Middle East. And some of their top home countries that they're coming from are India, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and Egypt, just to name a few. So the expectations of migrant workers are said to be rather low, as the labor situation in the countries they are leaving aren't that good themselves. And apparently some Kuwaiti employers take advantage of this situation of a somewhat desperate foreign workforce. And how the process works is migrant workers obtain a special visa by being sponsored by their employer in Kuwait. Once in Kuwait, if the worker has any kind of disagreement or falling out with their employer, they are at risk of losing their visa and being deported. And apparently this happens all the time under various circumstances. It is also said to be extremely difficult to change employment once in Kuwait. It's almost like some sort of bondage system from the dark ages. And some of the worker accounts are rather interesting and provide a interesting insight into the daily life in Kuwait. From the Americans for Democracy and Human Rights in Bahrain, one domestic housekeeper named Maya writes, "I'm lucky to now work for a boss that grants me my rights without having to fight for them. My previous boss would sometimes send me to bed with no dinner, her excuse being that there were no leftovers. A lot of times she would make me wake up around 6 a.m. and continue working for 15 hours straight with no breaks. I was not allowed to go to my room or to use my phone to talk to my children and my family during my shift. I couldn't save myself at the time because the system permitted employers to confiscate passports and photos as well." And the last part about foreign workers having their passports taken away and being stranded and stuck in a bad situation seems to be a pretty common complaint. And then there's another case from 2018, this one's even worse, of a 28-year-old Filipino worker who was found murdered in her apartment. And the prime suspects were her employer, a married couple whom she worked for and who fled the country after this young lady's murder. The suspect couple were captured and later confessed to killing their maid. And once back in Kuwait, they were both sentenced to death by hanging for murdering their servants. However, the Philippine government went on to ban its citizens from working in Kuwait and offered free plane fare home to Filipino workers in Kuwait at that time. And just in case if you could hear the music in the background, that's one of the 5 prayer calls per day that they have here. Anyhow, continuing on, the Kuwaiti government responded by enacting laws requiring employers to allow Filipino migrant workers the right to possess their own passport, the right to a 12-hour workday with a 1-hour break, and 1 day off per week, an end of the year bonus, and access to a working cell phone. And that last item of a working cell phone appears to be a safety measure to assist Filipino workers in need of reporting an emergency situation, and also allowing workers their own passport provides a level of freedom of movement to leave Kuwait that they might not have had prior to this time. And then there's another interesting case. This one is a bit old, from 2005, but it involves a Kuwaiti diplomat and his wife who brought 3 of their women house servants with them to the United States. And the servants' complaint states, the women were forced to work every day from about 6:30 a.m. until late in the night, sometimes as late as 1:30 in the morning, for a salary of approximately $250 per month. So that would be the same Kuwaiti minimum wage, apparently. And it goes on, the women, however, never received any of the money as it went directly to their families. They were subjected to threats and verbal physical abuse, including one particularly violent incident in which one of the women was knocked unconscious after being thrown against a counter by Al Saleh, the Kuwaiti diplomat. The women were often not allowed time to eat or to use the bathroom, and frequently were deprived of food. 2 of the women were allowed one hour off per month to attend church. The workers had their passports taken away, and they were isolated from contact with the external world. And one of the women, a Miss Sabithi, further stated, I was scared of my employers and believed that if I ran away or sought help, they would harm me or maybe even kill me. I believed that I had no choice but to continue working for them, even though they beat me and treated me worse than a slave. And to think all that happened in the United States, it seems that on some level the Kuwaiti diplomat must have known that if he was caught, there would be at least some sort of consequences, if not rather severe. But I guess the old habits involving the slave labor are rather hard to break. And it's also said that there are literally thousands of such complaints against Kuwaiti employers. And on to the next topic of freedom of expression here in Kuwait. Instead of explaining the laws, maybe I'll just read a quick summary of cases that involve the topic of freedom of expression here. In January of 2024, a trial court sentenced Anwar Harwadi to 4 years imprisonment in his absence for social media posts that criticized Kuwait's system of governments and royal family members. All right, so he got 4 years basically for criticizing the government. Here's another case, also January 2024. A court of appeal sentenced a Bedouin activist, Mohammed Al-Bargash, to 3 years in prison for social media posts criticizing Kuwait's politics towards the Bedouin. And the Bedouin, those are a nomadic tribal people living here in Kuwait. And lastly, in February of 2024, a trial court sentenced activist Abdullah Rose to 3 years in prison for having an online discussion in which Abdullah alleged that the government had business dealings with Israel contrary to Kuwaiti law. And that's a rather interesting case. So this person, just for suggesting that the Kuwaiti government had business dealings with Israel, he got 3 years in prison. So that just shows you how strict the Kuwaiti government can be. And these are all fairly recent cases, and there are many more that send a pretty clear message to anyone thinking about criticizing the government here that is probably not such a good idea.